right. Hello, everybody. This is David Fisher from Immigration Chambers, specialist immigration firm here in Auckland, New Zealand. And this is another part of our video series doing some interviews with specialists in the industry. This is my friend from Australia, whose name is Ed Rimmington. Hi, Ed. How's it going?
Good, thanks.
I've often heard it anecdotally said that Australia more easily will let people come in than New Zealand for things like visitor, student, the entry-level type visas, but they are so much more strict about getting rid of people or banning them from staying. Whereas in New Zealand here, somehow we're a bit of a soft touch once you're here. Once you're here, we have a bit of an approach of, okay, you're in our neighborhood now, so we find a way to look after you. And the tribunals and the courts often, will lean towards humanitarian arguments rather than just a strict border control of, sorry, no boat people, you're out of here, which I think happens more in Australia.
I think it's a bit political. Yes, Australia is generally more conservative with their sort of policies when it comes to immigration. Yes, those sort of temporary visas are sort of more easier to get and enter Australia, but sort of going on to permanent residency is a bit more
harder. The pathways are a bit stricter, yeah. Okay, so speaking of those pathways, what most people that we deal with really want to know is, how can I become a resident? Now, obviously, there are many pathways. The key ones being, to come in as Australia as a student, or to come in as a worker, or to come in as a family member. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about student visas. What are the really strong pathways to come in as a student in Australia?
So you're talking about the student with the sort of goal of trying to get permanent residency, or
goal of gaining residence, yeah.
Yeah. So in Australia, that a lot of people sort of use the student visa as a way to build skills that can be for occupations that are on our skilled migration list. So maybe similar to New Zealand, I'm not 100% sure, but in Australia that we have a skilled occupation list. This is a list of occupations in Australia that we have a shortage of skills, and that we need to supplement those with skilled migrants. So a lot of people who want to migrate to Australia or to get permanent residency, they study courses that are related to those occupations on the skills list.
Right. So this would be skills, obviously, at the high level: doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, and then coming further down into managerial positions, chefs, cooks, mechanical workers. And this would be similar to what we use under the ANSCO system, the Australia and New Zealand Standard Classification of Occupations. Am I correct?
Yeah, that you're correct. And that's what I was going to mention before, that actually something that we are unique on, that we both use that same ANSCO system for the occupation. So the occupations, I guess, that on your list will be the same as ours according to the ANSCO code.
That's right,
and
yeah.
What they're looking for in the regards to skill level and the sort of the description of the roles and the skills are exactly the same according to ANSCO.
I understand, though, that there is one key difference with the way, and that is in the way that we treat the assessment of skill under that list, especially when it comes to a residence application. Here in New Zealand, when you start your residence process, you make the claim that your occupation, your job, your employment matches the skill level requirements under ANSCO for that job. And then you go about applying. You submit your expression of interest, you submit all your documents, you get invited to apply, you submit your documents, you wait these days 12 months or more for a case officer to pick up the file. And then once the visa officer has the file in their hot hands, they'll start looking into it and then start making an assessment of the job that you're doing, and they will decide whether or not it matches the skill level. So that visa officer has, under current rules, the 100% of the assessment control. But I believe in Australia it's slightly different.
Oh, yes. That's something interesting, because in Australia, actually, we have skills assessment body. So rather than leaving it to a case officer to decide whether you have the appropriate skills, that before you apply for a skilled migration visa, that the requirement is that people need to get their skills assessed. So they need to contact their skills assessment body and make an application saying that, I've got the equivalent skills for, for example, a chef. And then they make the application, provide the documentation of their skills, and then that skills assessing body will check it and deem whether you have the required skills for that patient. Then after you have that skills assessed and approved, then people will go and make an application.
Applying, yeah. See, this in my opinion is really a much more advanced way to do it. And I've often joked, that the way we do it here is it's putting the cart before the horse. Because you're forcing people to put all of their energy and effort, time and money into the application, and then they sit back and wait, and then it's only 12 months, 15 months later when a case officer is looking at it that they have some idea about whether they're in the ballpark, and they're placing their future in the hands of, and here's where it gets interesting, because if you are claiming to be skilled, you are ANSCO skill level 1, 2 or 3, which are the high 3.
Yeah.
But you're placing the responsibility to assess where your job is with a person, an immigration officer, whose job actually falls under a lower skill level at number 4. So under ANSCO, immigration officer comes as a skill level 4 occupation. So somebody in a lower skilled job has the job to decide who is higher skilled. It's really quite boggles the mind.
Yeah, no, this system, I think it has its pros and cons. I think the biggest benefit is that if you're going and putting it with the skills assessing bodies for your particular industry, then you have experts who are assessing the skills. They know what type of roles and tasks that are related to being skilled in that area. ANSCO is just a guide, actually. I think the ANSCO code was made 30 years ago. So,
right.
There's a lot of
purposes.
Yeah, that's right. So leaving it up to a case officer to decide whether you have these specific skills where they don't even have any industry knowledge or knowledge about this specific occupation. Yeah, it's a bit, Russian roulette in that sort of way.
Yeah. But look, you see, we don't really have any way around it here in New Zealand because the policy specifically states that an assessment of skill is primarily based in that occupation description in ANSCO. So ANSCO is written there into the policy. Immigration officers don't have a choice but to follow that. I guess the only upside would be that, there are some cases where we have occupations or employment that doesn't necessarily easily fit into a skill, of one occupation, but we're able to convince a case officer independently that they should be approved for residency anyway. And so sometimes that can be a bonus for people who might not otherwise be assessed properly under a private assessment.
Yeah, no, we have a similar thing with our temporary work visas in Australia. So while that the skills assessment is more towards if you're going to get permanent residency, with a temporary work visas that there's a bit more discretion and a bit more sort of leniency about the type of work experience and whether you are skilled for that occupation. Because sometimes, as I said, that the ANSCO code is 30 years old, it's a guide. There are new occupations that are out there that haven't got an ANSCO code. So you need to that's where the temporary skilled work visas that you can, claim that this is related work experience, or this is related to this occupation.
Then it can have a more nuanced assessment.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no, that's good because it brings me into another subject I wanted to talk about, and that is work visas. Here in New Zealand, we've often been called a one-trick pony because, really there's one main type of work visa and there's one main type of residence application for most people. Whereas in Australia, you have the various states, you've got federal, you've got state level, you have employer level sponsorship arrangements. Here in New Zealand, generally speaking, you have an applicant comes to New Zealand, finds a job in the public arena. The employer wants to hire them, but they don't know what to do. And so they have to apply for what we call an essential skills visa. And even though that may change later this year, what it's called, generally speaking, they have to go through the labour market test. It gets advertised and you prove that there are no New Zealanders, or you demonstrate that there are no available New Zealanders who are suitable for the job. But I understand there's a much wider variety of types of work visas in Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. That for working in Australia, that there's sort of a bit of a variety of types of temporary work visas. Our main temporary work visa is called the TSS visa. So that's a temporary short-term skill visa. And basically that visa, if you someone with some working for an employer and you have particular skills and the employer wants to keep to sponsor you, then they can apply for a visa under that stream. However, there are a bit of, not restrictions, but there's rules that you must apply to actually apply for that visa. For example, now you have to have 2 years related or relevant work experience in that occupation that they're nominating you for. So that's where the sort of, for a temporary work visa, there's a bit more discretion, because someone may be trying to be sponsored as a chef, but they might have worked as a cook for 3 years. So you can sort of, and they might work as a chef at that in that place in that employer for their employer for a year. So you can sort of use that sort of related experience to meet the benchmarks.
Right. Okay.
And also we do labour market testing as well. So that's a requirement we need for employers to see if there are any Australian citizens or permanent residents that could meet that occupation. Usually the ad goes up for 28 days, and it doesn't have to be consecutively. It can be like you could have put up for 2 weeks here or 2 weeks, 2 months previously. It does, as long as it's within a 6-month period that you can have the labour market testing there. And also, depending on the different free trade agreements, some countries don't need to do labour market testing at all.
Really? So you mean people who are holding certain passports can just bypass that altogether?
That's correct.
Interesting.
So,
like, for example,
I'll give you a big example. So I'm not sure about your clients, but a lot of my clients are Korean. So because of the free trade, the Korean-Australian Free Trade Agreement, one of the things in there is like the movement of labour. So Australia can't have any like discriminatory policies towards like Koreans wanting to sort of get work in Australia. So they're exempt from labour market testing.
Wow.
However, it's a bit of a red herring, because even though you're exempt for labour market testing, you still have to show that you haven't, the employer hasn't sort of just made the job just for this person, that there's a genuine position, there's a genuine need for that person.
Okay, well, how would they do that?
Just like they would sort of refer to like the organisation, like for example, that they can provide evidence, this is our organisational chart.
Or maybe introduce an employment agreement from the previous worker who had the same role, and then show that they resigned, something like that.
Yeah, that sort of evidence will help show that it's a genuine position.
Well, this is something that we're always telling people here, and I guess it's the same anywhere in the world, for actually any illegal industry, any industry that involves dealing with administration of governments especially, and that is that you can't simply claim something, you have to prove it. You've got to come up with some kind of evidence. What is evidence? Well, okay, evidence can be a statement that someone makes, signed off, but really what we're talking about is documents that can be independently verified to demonstrate what you're claiming. It's the same every country, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I think our countries are very sort of bureaucratic in that sort of way. They want to see evidence so they can make a decision based on that.
That's right.